Well, I've got a treat for you. This is a set of LS3 heads. In fact, they're not just LS3 heads. They're LSA heads. High performance. Big crusty chunks of rust sitting in the head bolt holes. Rust sitting here. Clearly these have been installed on an engine. There's a head gasket imprint. You know, this guy sure can do a better surface than I can. But shiny isn't everything. I think since I've got enough of a guilty conscience, we'll leave the shop unnamed for ethics and whatnot. We'll leave it alone. This is just an educational video. The story is the guy that was doing the machine work for this particular individual started to let things slip towards the end. Ooh, morbid. And as unfortunate as that is, stuff was going out the door and may or may not have been up to par. No judgment here. All that I care about is figuring out what's wrong, and that's why we're here. So, we need to strip these heads down. And well, at a glance, looks like this engine sat outside assembled. And based on experience, I'd say we're in for a treat. Don't take my word for it. Let's take a look at this ourselves. So you may ask, what's the local bumblefuck like myself doing with these fancy LSA heads? Well, it's my job to figure out what's wrong, and I get to recommend what needs to be done to repair these heads that were previously repaired. And while I was sworn to secrecy, a wise man, Julius Caesar, once said, "Ape together strong." So here you are with me. We're gonna look at these heads. And right off the bat, focus. Ah, yes, the infamous white lithium grease. I'll be back. And I'm back. And of all industrial lubricants, this one is one of the worst that you can use for engines. Multi-purpose, good for gears, your house, your car. Don't recommend it. This stuff hardens. When stuff sits around, it turns solid. You don't want this inside of your engine. It's highly frowned upon. Looking at you, manufacturer with a B. In fact, we can see right here that grease has started to solidify. It's highly frowned upon to use this stuff on a valve guide. Sticking valves in an LS3, LS engine, LSA, doesn't matter. That's a problem. Go look up LS3 heads. You'd probably find a bunch of them with a broken off intake or exhaust valve. People do things with these heads that they shouldn't be doing. Cheap parts, cheap cams. Things try to make babies with other things. Pistons tend to get shattered. And you end up having to call some prick like me, and you end up on YouTube. Or, worse, Instagram. My Instagram is chaos. And I love chaos. More valves out. Rusty, rusty. No good. In fact, we're going to designate these heads now. Milwaukee makes the best pens. No freaking good. Let's try here. No freaking good. Let's keep on going down the line. And for $600 worth of valves, this is a real waste. Gotta say. See some of that porting. That's an odd looking bronze guide. I actually don't recognize that guide. I think it's a Pep brand valve guide. That's not good. I won't be able to pick this up on camera, but there's some burrs on the keeper groove. So valve's actually quite heavy. Not a big fan of a solid stem intake valve on a rectangle port cylinder head. Reason for that is it gets to be really heavy. If you do want to put a solid stem valve in place, you're going to have to put in a good quality spring. Not these entry-level generic, you pick a brand, they sell this spring, valve spring. More rust. No good. That rust will cause that spring to crack, break, fail, whatever, you name it. Right now, in a hurry. That's rough. That can't be good. Okay, let's give these heads a flip. This is where that rusty spring was living. Quite a bit of garbage floating around in there. Now, for those of you saying that you could just clean this off, you're wrong. Don't recommend that. Don't do that. Especially, it's not worth blowing up a $12,000 engine over a $10 valve spring. Let's get these valve stem seals off. They're nothing special. These are just nitrile valve stem seals. You'll see these advertised online as a Viton valve stem seal, but if they're black, they're not Viton. Well, if you're one of those special people that don't know how to remove valve stem seals, here you go. These are valve stem seal pliers. There's your part number. Order them. They're 30 bucks. Get over it. And use heat. They come right off with heat. Look at that, like a pro. I hear the Black Seals Matter crowd marching outside already. Crimes against car parts. More white lithium grease. Another thing that this stuff will do. This stuff will get mixed in with your oil, and it's not soluble. You'll have little chunks of white lithium floating around inside of your oil system, and this stuff will quickly clog up a pickup screen, clog an oil galley, cause problems, smoke your motor. Just tossing me to the side. Before we keep going, I'm gonna have to apologize to that hardware. I know what it's like to be thrown away like trash. I can see that these valve guides have been honed. Let's give them a little brush. We've got to remove this thick layer of white lithium grease since this guy just bathed in it. That whole shop was probably sticky. Hey, it's making me uncomfortable thinking about it. Actually, I'm feeling kind of excited too. It's a strange feeling. There's a great big stinking chamfer on the top of those valve guides. Let's see if we can get a closer look. Wow. That's got to be about 40 or 50 thousandths wide. Not beautiful. So much for the body positivity. By feel, let's check out this guide clearance. We'll wipe off a little more grease. Whoa. I sure hope that gets picked up by the camera. Your valve guides, especially a bronze guide, shall not click. On a bronze guide, in an LS cylinder head, naturally aspirated, turbocharged, supercharged, I don't care. Your guide clearances must not exceed, let's say about 1 thou to 1 thou 4 on the intake, and then on the exhaust, let's say 1 thou 3 to 1 thou 6. Beyond that, we'd consider that guide to be smoked. No good. Once upon a time, this mic said Mitutoyo, but ethyl alcohol and solvents and whatnot, they weren't having it. But made in Japan. This mic reads in 10 thousandths increments. An LS valve will usually come in at 313.5. These measure in at 313.2. Let's try the intake valve. 313, even. Valve stem on the exhaust valve is just slightly larger than the intake, and yet we feel just as loose. Let's see if we can find a stock valve. Check out the feel on it. I already know that the guide clearance here with these valves is somewhere in the realm of 2.5, 3 thousandths. That's easily double of what's acceptable on a bronze guide. Here we go. We've got a factory L92 intake valve. Let's measure that valve stem. 313.4, still loose. We're shrinking it, but still loose. Now, the shop that worked on these heads, they have a SURDI machine. SURDI machines, unlike mine and many others, use a straight valve guide pilot. This is my smaller 8mm. I think this comes in at 7.98 millimeters. This is a Rottler brand. They go straight, 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 and then they taper out about 3 or 4 tenths of a thousandth. And what that allows them to do is they drop down into a valve guide, and then they're supposed to lock up at the top, like this one does. Now a SURDI pilot is straight, so they don't taper up at the top. And what that means is their machines require the valve guides to be straight as well as round. A dead pilot or a tapered pilot gives you a little bit of fudge factor, but you can't let out of round go, and you have to have a straight guide. All these things really matter if you care about your valve job quality. Here we've got a split ball dial bore gauge. I've used a mic and set this to the diameter of the intake valve. Once it's set, it's real easy. So right in the middle of the guide, we're 1,006. And it jumps up to just over 2 thousandths. Let's check this intake. Same story, starts at 2, shrinks down, goes back to 2, or back towards 2. That needle should not be moving like that. Really what I'd like to see is this needle move no more than 1 or 2 10,000ths. I've got almost 1,000th worth of spread from guide to guide. That wouldn't work on a SURDI machine by any means. It wouldn't even work for my machine. Now the last thing left for us is to check the seat runout. In my experience, the seat runout from that shop has been pretty good. Here's a very inexpensive runout gauge. It centers off of a pilot, and then there's a little needle that touches the valve seat, and as you rotate the tool, the needle pushes the whole dial indicator up and down, and that's how you measure seat runout. Now I'd like to see this number be 1,000th or less. You know, eventually I'll buy one of those fancy $3,000 ones. Whoa. Esta no good. Hello sir, we have a problem. Let's zero that. Four thousandths. 0. So that first intake seat has 4 thousandths. Doesn't really spell that good of a story for the rest of it. You know, I told them you should be checking, but you know, runout gauges lie. It's a real thing people say. Why does this matter? Imagine your valve as if it were a paperclip. And we've all done this. We've all taken a paperclip. We've all played with it, bent it back and forth, and you know what's coming. Eventually, the paperclip's gonna get fatigued, it's gonna feel weaker, it's gonna break in half. Seat runout is the #1 cause of failure in racing and performance cylinder heads. LSs are highly popular. It's easily the most modified engine in existence now. Go on Facebook, go on Craigslist, do a search for LS heads. You're gonna find a boatload of blown up LS heads. Whether it's from previous machine work, worn out seats, worn out guides, I don't care. Runout is gonna cause a failure. And with the thousands of times your valve opens and closes every minute, it doesn't take very long for one of those valve heads to fail, break off, and destroy your engine. Now for your consumers, don't let this scare you. There's a lot of good shops out there. Most of the shops that are churning out subpar work, they're dropping like flies. This is a really tough industry. New engine machinists are not coming into the trade. Those few that are tend to be more skilled and more talented than the people that are going out. In a later video, we're going to go ahead, replace these valve guides. I'll walk you through that process. We'll get it put up in the machine, fix the valve job, clean all the parts. I'm going to have to replace the set of springs. We'll get everything deburred, cleaned, and maybe I'll walk you through the assembly process. And then once it's on the bench for assembly, I'll show you our improvement to the seat runout, and we'll get this thing reassembled and get it out of our hair. I'd say that's a good place to put a pin in it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.